May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I tell you, it is so good to be back home amongst friends, old friends and new friends. Thank you to my new friend, Bishop Bonnie, who invited me to be here, and it's such an honor to be with you this afternoon. I bring you greetings also from your new friends in Vermont, from my diocese. And I'm wondering this afternoon, who are your friends? And for that, actually, what are friends? Well, Jesus said, "You are my friends when you do the things I command you." So are you a friend of Jesus? Is the church, our beloved Episcopal Church, is it a friend of Jesus? And Jesus said to the disciples, "You are my friends." He ties his understanding of friend to the word agape, a word for love. And we don't have the equivalent for this variety of love. When Jesus uses these words together, he intensifies the meaning of friendship. What is meant can be understood as a ride or die friend. The kind of friendship that withstands time and distance, a bond so intimate that it touches the soul and inner core. It is transparent and vulnerable. The friendship Jesus refers to is a kind which is rooted in love so pure that it exists before one knows or can conceive of it. You know that, "Oh, how I love Jesus because he first loved me and calls me his own kind of love." That kind of love. And as Jesus put it, this is the "you didn't choose me, but I chose you" kind of type of love and friendship. And in living in his last hours with the disciples before his crucifixion, Jesus elevated the disciples to the level of this unique friendship, knowing he would pass on his ministry to them, knowing they would be afraid, grief-stricken, and lost. He gave them the key to finding their footing and direction in an uncertain time. If they would remember their friendship, if they would remember his love for them, they would be able to see that being a friend of God, combined with the power of that love, is pure freedom. Being a friend of God elevates one's ability to stay grounded in who you are as God's own beloved, no matter what circumstances one faces. And it couldn't make complete sense to the disciples what all this meant. They needed to see Jesus and see how he was not changed by their failure or the injustices he met at the hands of people of privilege and power. They understood what he meant to be Jesus' friend after they denied and deserted him, after his death and resurrection, after the moments when they witnessed firsthand the power of God's friendship and love over injustice and death. "I love you as the Father has loved me. Love me as I have loved you." Pure freedom, pure joy. This is the kind of friend Jesus was to the disciples, and this is what he asked them to be for him. And as I think about the ministry of Absalom Jones, I never cease to marvel at his ability to lay down his life for his friends and his community. Absalom Jones was a friend of Jesus, both in and out of season. Motivated by the experience of his mother and siblings being sold, Jones purchased his wife's freedom before his own. He knew firsthand that of all the people in the United States, enslaved women's children were born to be non-citizens. He organized communities to lay down their lives for their community. He and Richard Allen established the Free African Society. And I bet you we wouldn't do this. Usually when you pay dues to an organization, you get something back, right? You expect them to elevate you or to help you do better. But the dues for the Free African Society were used to support people who had recently been freed from their enslavement. The Methodist Episcopal Church was attractive to free blacks because they condemned slavery. They were even willing to license blacks to preach. Absalom Jones and Richard Allen were among the first black people to be licensed to preach in the United States. But what happened next is the reminder that the church has always struggled with how to live as friends of God. Jones and Allen drew many free blacks to join St. George's, so many people, so that the white members did not want to worship in the presence of so many black people. And what a betrayal for those black worshipers of St. George's in Philadelphia. And if you're familiar with the story, you know there came a time when they were notified that they would have to move to the balcony designated for them. And they didn't get the message in mail or on a bulletin board. No. While they were on their knees praying, they were asked to move. And I wonder what prayer Jones was praying when the trustees of St. George's came to escort them away. Did he ask God to strengthen him in his resolve to be a friend of Jesus? As he asked to complete his prayer before he left, did he recall his favorite Bible verse from Galatians and use it as a prayer? Christ has set me free to live a free life, so I'll take my stand. Please, Lord, give me the strength to never again let anyone put a harness of slavery on me. When the yellow fever epidemic of 1793 hit Philadelphia, Absalom Jones and Richard Allen organized groups of people from the Free African Society to care for the citizens of Philadelphia who were stricken with yellow fever, whether they were black or white. And so many of the whites fled the city if they were able, and some of them even accused Jones and Allen of profiting by caring for the sick, unable to imagine that they were motivated not by money, but by their faith. You see, they were unable to even imagine the kind of love of God for the church that Absalom Jones demonstrated by investing his whole self in his ministry. Loving so abundantly and without reservation, he embodied what it means to be a friend of God. His example allowed the Society of Free Africans to meet the needs of whole people, creating a community of support and affirmation. Gaining practice at being whole people enabled them to see beyond their own personal needs, to notice and respond to the needs of others, even those who would have denied them their personhood. The beloved community they established helped them to be free from society's definition of them. Their beloved community was an example for a society that struggled to live as a people God created them to be. In 1802, Jones was ordained by Bishop William White as the first African-American Episcopal priest. And then more than 20 years later, Bishop White also ordained John Henry Hopkins, a priest, and 8 years later, after that, in 1832, consecrated and ordained him the first bishop of Vermont. Now, Hopkins went on to become the 8th presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in 1865 as the Civil War was ending. And he worked so hard. Hopkins worked very hard to keep those who supported slavery in the church. He wrote a pamphlet, The Bible Case for Slavery. in which he claimed slavery was not a sin, but he did view it as problematic because the growing number of slaves put white people at risk. He also feared inevitable rebellions and continued conflict between free and slave states. And his solution was to buy slaves and send them to Africa if the slave owners agreed. He defended corporal punishment of enslaved people and refuted the supposition of the U.S. Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, claiming that it went against the teachings of Jesus. And let me just stop for a second. I live in the house that he used to live in. He's resting, I don't know, so quietly in my backyard. I didn't know this until I was already living there. But anyway. Hopkins claimed a slave would not know how to use freedom. He wrote, "The slavery of the Negro race as maintained in the southern states appears to me fully authorized in the Old and New Testament. Slavery, in my humble judgment, has raised the Negro incomparably higher in the scale of humanity and seems, in fact, to be the only instrumentality through which the heathen posterity of Canaan have been raised at all." Hopkins let his power, privilege, and the sin of white supremacy enslave him. And how is it that two men of the same church, who would both claim to be a friend of Jesus, how could they be so entirely different? What does it mean to be a friend of God? Later on in the gospel that we heard today, it says, Pilate wanted to set Jesus free, but the crowd again yelled, "If you set this man free, you are no friend of the emperor. Anyone who claims to be a king is an enemy of the emperor." You see, the company you keep and those with whom you associate is an indication of the way you live and love. Clearly, one can't simply say they are a friend of God to make it true. Hopkins' affiliation with the slaveholding movers and shakers in the South deepened his defense of his hateful views. But Absalom Jones was not enslaved by the degradation foisted upon him. He helped create a beloved community that set him free to proclaim the gospel of love, regardless of the chances and changes of life. Being a friend of God is embodied in our relationships with family, community, and the church. A friend of God sees people and creation holistically as a divine expression of creativity, giving all of God's creation a place of honor. A friend of God cares about and acknowledges the needs of people, not just spiritually, but also physically and emotionally and psychologically. And I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if the church had taken a different road when slavery seemed preferable to freedom? I'm reading again from Galatians and adding another verse and continuing on from what we heard earlier. And Paul said, "I suspect you would never intend this, but this is what happens. When you attempt to live by your own religious plans and projects, you are cut off from Christ. You fall out of grace. For in Christ, neither our most conscientious religion nor disregard of religion amounts to anything. What matters is something far more interior, faith expressed in love." So in the year 2020, how would we say the church is doing with her mission to be a friend of God? What are we doing, and how are we doing with our call to never again submit to the bondage of slavery? You know, our nation meanders up and down the path toward freedom. Sometimes we walk with purpose. Sometimes we take a wrong turn. We try to take a shortcut. And sometimes we look up and find we have no guides to help us find our way. As friends of God, we are called to lead our world on the path of freedom and love. We are in a liminal space, not unlike the time when the church could have split over the issue of slavery. And we didn't choose to split because money and white supremacy kept us enslaved to fear and lies. And I tell you, the legacy of this sin lingers as an impediment to our freedom and ministry to the world. So where do we begin to address it, and how do we go forward? Well, if we can't love each other, are we a friend of God? And if we are not a friend of God, how can we love the world we've been called to love? The church must continue to learn and grow in her capacity to be a friend of God. We must attend to the love Jesus commanded us to share with each other, even as we attend to the world. And we are making some progress. We become more and more inclusive and affirming of all the ways that God has created us. Our leadership is becoming more diverse. And under the leadership of our presiding Bishop, Michael Curry, we've seen a revival and recommitment of our members to follow the way of love, developing faith practices that lead to a God-centered life. And today we are gathered in the heart of your diocese, the Cathedral Church of St. Paul, where the seat of your bishop resides, right over there. That's why it's called a cathedral, because the cathedra is there. And your cathedral is located in the blackest city in the nation, even blacker than Atlanta or DC. And some might say, oh no, look, I researched it, and it's true. But being the blackest city in the nation, that fact has colored the politics of this region and even of this diocese. And because of this distinction, my friends, this diocesan household has a special call to be about the work of racial reconciliation. And the sermon she preached at her seating, your new bishop, in a very vulnerable and powerful way, spoke about her own privilege on the continuum of white privilege. She challenged this diocese to be a leader in the continued struggle for freedom. And she has invited you all to read America's Original Sin, written by Jim Wallace, a family friend of Sojourners, family friend of my family, and he was born and raised in Detroit. Raise your hand if you have bought the book. There's still time. Please participate in reading this transformative book. I can't wait to learn what fruits will come from your studies together. And see, and I can say this to you all because you are my friends. I have always loved this place and her people. And I'm overjoyed that your new bishop will challenge you to be friends of Jesus as you relate to the communities of Southeast Michigan. And it's not just that she's challenged you, but you chose her to lead you in this time in your common ministry together. So embrace your call and her leadership. Attend to your friendship with each other and with the one who loved us first. When you do this, you will be the friends that our world needs.